alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Hello and welcome to Alive After Reading, the podcast about where I talk with other writers about books and stuff. And I'm your host, Tim Niederreiter. Welcome to the show, and I'm trying a little bit of a new intro, so I'm going to draw attention to it for a second. But never mind. With me today, this episode, is a returning guest and podcaster in her own right, Jenna Greene. Welcome back.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's always great to have guests of any kind, old or new, friends and enemies, I guess.
It's just weird when you say podcaster because I am, but I've only been at it for 6 months, 7 months, so it still feels feels like I don't necessarily know what I'm doing all the time.
Oh yeah, but I mean, it's like when somebody says people call each other, a human. I mean, you don't call another person a human, but you think of a peep. I think most people don't really know what they're doing. That's my point. Notice how I said that on a podcast. I've been doing this for a couple of years, actually 3 or 4 years now. Time flies, and I don't know what I'm doing. Obviously, who does?
Okay, so you're saying in 3 or 4 years from now, I'll still not know what I'm doing, or I'll still
just get used to
feel like I don't know what I'm doing.
That's a good question. I think a little bit of both.
Okay, a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. Got it.
Yeah. You're gonna have some more knowledge than you have now, but not all the knowledge you think you need. And probably you'll be partially right about that. I'm just saying. I'm from my own experience. I just learned about redubbing, where you take a conversation where you have 2 separate audio tracks, one for each person. This is gonna be in the weeds for a second, folks. But J. Daniel Sawyer, another guest on who has been a guest on the show a bunch, he had to redub a bunch of stuff for his podcast, where he was re-recording all the things he said in a conversation with someone else, which is very strange.
That's above my level.
He was because he just had poor audio quality on his end, so he had to redo the quality. It's like that's dedication. Hats off to him. But anyway, I can't foresee doing that in the future personally, but who knows. So, Jenna, could you tell the readers a little bit about the listeners a little bit about yourself and the books you write and the stuff you do?
Sure. So, I write YA and primarily YA fantasy. I have a series called the Imagine series after the first book, which is called Imagine. So there's 3 books in that series, and if I ever get some free time, there will be a 4th. Then I have a kind of a dystopian fantasy. That one's called Reborn. And the sequel is written. It's just in the process of edits and formatting and all that good stuff that the publisher really handles. So I can just let them work on it right now, and I can just anxiously await the email saying, fix this. Which is just, well, actually gets easier because the more you write, the better you get at it, and then the edits don't look so scary. Because the first time you ever get edits back, you could have a mental breakdown. But once you have some practice at it, it gets a little smoother.
Yeah, I've never really worked with either an editor at a publishing company, or even a developmental editor. Because I publish independently, of course. So as people here would know, that's why I say, of course. But I have had some major trepidation when I send stuff off to my proofreader or my copy editors even. And that has been really, but it actually mostly ended up being really affirming for me. I don't know. I felt like, oh yeah, if something was wrong, it's because I kind of already knew it was wrong. I don't know. By the time I started hiring editors, I've been at this for a while though.
Yeah, it's not so bad now. At the first, they were like, "Whoo, you do a lot of stuff wrong." Now it's just like, "Oh, you missed this," and you're like, "Oh, I know that. How did I miss that?"
Right.
So you're just like, "Oh."
Yeah, isn't that the weirdest thing though? Isn't that the weirdest? Is like where you're like, "Oh, I figured I should have fixed that," but then you just hadn't. It's like you always know.
You look at it so much, and it's hard to get either that distance or you're just sometimes a lot of my errors are kind of in the middle of it when I'm just because at the beginning I'm really focused. At the end, I want to make sure everything's perfect. And somewhere in the middle, I'm just like, I don't know, it's a comma. Just put it somewhere.
Just put it in there somewhere. We know doesn't there need to be a comma? Come on.
There needs to be a comma. I'm sure there must have to have a comma somewhere.
I'm imagining this now, like at every level, like every sentence. It's like, yeah, we have to put a comma in the middle. There's the beginning, the end. Those are the rock. No, it doesn't go like that. The sentences are not books.
No. And I've gotten better at being more ruthless with my editing. Like before, I would keep everything, even if like I had 3 sentences in a row saying basically the same thing, and they'd be like, "Cut it," and I'm like, "But it's pretty, and I work so hard on it, so keep all 3." And they would be like, "Well, no." And now I'm just like, cut.
You are out of here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Because
man.
I have the confidence, I think.
Yeah.
Like before, it'd be like, well, if I cut this line and I realize I need to put that moment back in, what if I can't write it again? What if it come off as well? And now I have the confidence that if I cut a paragraph or I cut a scene and then I realize months later, oh, that scene really needed to be in there, I can rewrite it. It won't turn out exactly the same, but I've got enough talent that I can do it and it won't turn out like gibberish.
Right. That's been the story of this year for me, is realizing how well I can actually do if I put my mind to it. That's on point for what I'm going through right now. Because I started dictating last summer, and then I dictated one book, came out okay. The editing was a bear on that one, though, so I actually had to go through another 2 rounds of it with my proofreader and everything to make sure everything was good. And that was after I published it. It was the second round because I realized, there's a ton of typos in this book still. And now I've been working on a sequel to that book, and actually then I had to throw out basically a whole novel worth of words at one point. And that was took a lot of doing and a lot of like confidence, I guess, because I'm like, I can do better. This book is okay, but it needs to be amazing, you know?
Yeah.
And I went off in totally the wrong direction the first time I wrote that story. It's the same title, but it's a completely different book now. I mean, there's a couple scenes that are the same. Anyway, that book is the one I'm editing right now. I'm almost done with it, and I'm very happy with how it's going. And I just wanted to say that briefly because I really am excited about this one. That should be out next month, early September. So that's cool.
Woo-hoo,
yeah, it's my second
go.
epic fantasy book. Yeah.
Getting stuff done.
Exactly. It feels great to get stuff done. I mean, writing these little novellas, that's cool too. It's a great way to get a little momentum going.
Yeah, I've been trying to do short stories and things over the last 3 or 4 years. And some people don't get it because they're like, wouldn't a short story be easier than a novel? I'm like, not necessarily, because they're very different forms. They're not different genres, but it's a very different style. Pacing's all different. You got to get the setting like quick. And I write novels and I write series. So trying to condense and just focus on, fewer characters, fewer plot elements. It's tricky for me. But it's been my goal for about 3 or 4 years to just really go outside my comfort zone and try and write some short stories. And some of them were horrendous, but some of them are not so bad.
So what kind of short stories are you writing? Are you writing more fantasy or YA short stories? What kind of genre are you writing?
Yeah,
Okay.
still YA. Well, I guess I don't know. Like even when I write adult characters, I feel like sometimes they still come off YA, but fantasy. I did a pirate one. I did a retelling of Goldilocks and the Three Bears from the point of view of the mama bear.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That sounds cool.
Yeah, and then just a few other ones that are kind of floating around looking for anthologies and things. But mostly just testing the waters and see if I could do it.
Yeah.
And just try and if you've ever tried anything new, sometimes you just have to practice.
Absolutely. I mean, practice is like the most important part of trying something new. Because when you start something new, you're usually pretty bad at it. Let's be honest here. Most people don't come in with this whole skill, or you got your beginner's luck, and then you start second guessing. That's kind of my formula anyway for not doing well after you start off. Like, oh, the first one was pretty good. Then we get to the next one. I'm like, oh, I thought I knew how to do this, but I really was just lucky.
And sometimes you can just write, and it doesn't have to have a goal of being published.
Yep.
You can just write it because you had a story. Oh, someone told me, a guy I used to carpool with told me a story about how his great aunts were twins and they used to have relations with men and then pretend to be each other and sleep with the different guys and then compare notes. And they did this a lot in like the 1920s. So I took a spin on that and wrote a short story about that because I was just like, this is just
That's wow.
weird.
That's
Weird.
That is a pretty incredible bit of, small time history, small H history, this sort of thing that doesn't end up in the books necessarily. In like textbooks or whatever.
Like
people,
people
are strange. Yeah.
People aren't as pure as you think they are in history.
Yeah, they don't. Yeah, people have been up to weird stuff throughout history. That's probably the proof enough of that. Other than obviously, and not just the truly terrible stuff that always comes up in like ancient history. I was always thinking about like to name one of the big dynamos of podcasting, Dan Carlin, his Hardcore History podcast, where he's talking about, like in the old ones where he was talking about Carthage, that city Rome destroyed before they made it big. Well, it's basically how they made it big is they destroyed Carthage, and they're like, oh, now we rule the Mediterranean or whatever. But there's this, at least I think it's in the history somewhere, is like how they'd have this statue with the arms, like the outstretched arms, and they would put children. This is pretty disturbing. So, like, the content warning here: children on those arms, and then lower the arms into the fire. The sacrifice, yeah, because it was sacrifice. It's insane. I was like, oh boy, that's terrifying. Yeah, I should, content warning there. Obviously, hardcore history is hardcore. That's one of the things about that show. It earns its title.
Have you ever watched Drunk History?
No.
The TV show?
No, I've never done that. I don't get a lot of channels here. Not much of a TV person.
I just watch it on YouTube, and it's the funniest thing ever. And it's real history stories, and that you don't necessarily know about. It's just that they're retold by people that happen to be completely drunk.
Oh, that just sounds like fun. I'll have to check that out.
It's accurate.
Yeah. At least as accurate as the drunk person will be.
Well, they'll correct things on the screen if they have to.
Neat.
They're like, they meant this person.
So, yeah, speaking of history, though, I did go off on a bit of a tangent there, and I mean, that was silly, but I guess it's just, when it comes to history, and actually, when it comes to history, do you incorporate any of that in your fantasy, or what kind of books, I mean, what kind of eras or technology levels do you write with your fantasy?
Well, that's not a lot of sci-fi. I mean, I create the worlds by myself, but a lot of it relates to history in different levels. Like the Reborn series, it's essentially about slavery. It's just that it's not African Americans being enslaved, it's reborns being enslaved. But a lot of the emotions are the same. If you are, having your freedoms and your rights taken away, if, the emotion of being owned by someone and all the class distinctions. And there's even like references to like a similar to an Underground Railroad, but just, my own spin on it. Right. So some of my connections to history that one's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, chapter 1, she sold into slavery. Some of my other stuff, it's more like, when you're a fantasy writer, you have to come up with a lot of stuff.
Yes.
You have to come up with locations, cultures, appearances. I mean, and some of it you can have fairies and elves and dwarves, and that's fun. But some of it you have to, like, what would a castle look like? So I'm, back in history looking at how physically a castle is structured, or how the Aztecs lived, or the First Nations people. And then I'm going to take how they created their homes and just, that can be a culture in my novel. We'll rewrite culture, but I can just kind of take little doses of things in our real world as inspiration, right? So there's the
Right.
different levels of it.
Right. I mean that reminds when you said the way the way that Native Americans might have First Peoples might have lived, like or did live rather. I couldn't help but remember some of the Western. I forget which state it's in. I forget a lot of the names at the moment, but it was Mesa Verde, where they've got those. I think they're called kivas. It's where they got the pits in the mountainside, and they would live in those. Like they would dig holes in these caverns, and they would live in these like big cylindrical holes, and then they just climb up out of the cave, and boom, you're in a cave on a cliffside. It's very scary, and I climbed around there when I was a kid, with my family. We went on explored that area with the guides and stuff, but it was weird and frankly terrifying to someone who's afraid of heights. But it's a great like unique kind of location that is the kind of thing if you just many of these are still there. I mean, people don't still live in them, I don't think, but somebody could be living in one of them. It'd be possible.
You don't know.
Yeah, like a hermit out there somewhere, maybe. But anyway, I wanted to ask about the podcast though, because I was just recently a guest as well on your show, Quill and Ink, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I almost getting mixed up because I was also a guest on Spilling Ink recently, so I'm like, I hope I got that one.
Oh, yeah. Why did we name them so similarly?
It's okay. Quill and Ink's a good one. It's a better name than this podcast has, honestly. Except for being an A, starting with an A. My podcast doesn't have a lot of advantages to the title.
See, we have a Q. What were we thinking?
But so Quill and Ink, what's up with that, and what's going on there? Yeah.
Yeah. So we're on Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. So there's I don't even know how many shows. I'm assuming like 30, 40.
Wow.
Right. And they're all shows about books and reading and authors. There's some that are about crime. There's some that are about romance. Ours is general. We don't have a specific genre. And so we interview authors from, we say all over the world. We haven't got international yet. But we've had authors from all over the US and all over Canada, and all sorts of different authors, romance authors, psychological thriller authors, and then other people too, like publishers, podcasters, book reviewers. So we're trying to really get all the literary world involved, and think about how different people write and why they write what they do, and fiction and nonfiction, and get inside authors' personalities and then inside their craft.
I'm gonna say the personalities are probably scarier than the craft side. That's maybe why this show I kind of instinctually go toward the craft side. No, I'm just kidding.
So I co-host with Miranda O, and we're vastly different except for our writing and our craziness. And so when other people come on, we're well, actually the other people are usually the normal ones, but authors have that thread of creativity to get, like, that's combined, like that's something we're all gonna have in common.
Yeah.
So there's always something to talk about, and always some way you can relate to, no matter who we've talked to.
Right. Have you ever interviewed somebody who's who couldn't really explain their process, or because I think I'd have difficulty doing that. I'd try, but I don't know. It's so, there's so much to it, and I always feel like I'm missing like the main thing whenever I try to talk about that sort of thing about my own.
Some of the first time authors or the newer authors, sometimes they have a little bit of trouble because they haven't reflected on it yet. It's so fresh, it's so new. They're like, I don't know, I just wrote this book. I don't know how I did it, but flash forward 5 years, they'll be like, oh, this is how I did it. Right?
Yeah.
And
Hindsight
so
being 2020.
yeah, especially the nonfiction writers, because that's vastly different from fiction, and they've often have the ideas and the meat, but maybe someone else is doing the editing. And so, but it's still interesting to find out why they decided to write what they did, or how they researched it. or or how they feel now that they are a published author. So there's still other parts of the craft that we could talk about. Marketing, all
Yeah,
those.
yeah. It's
There's
really
so
important
many
stuff.
different levels.
Absolutely. So I guess maybe I'm just insecure. Probably that's part of it. A lot of us authors are insecure too, of course. Because I was thinking about like, oh, maybe I know a little bit about how I wrote some of my books. I mean, come on, it's been 17 years since I started writing, and I've written about that many books. Actually, way more than that.
I
But
know the mistakes. I can list. I know what not to do.
yeah, I can tell you what didn't work. That's easy.
Here's all the things that didn't work. Don't do
Yes.
any of those, and you should be good.
But actually, that's the funny thing though. Is like it's not even that simple because it's like don't do any of those the way I did them. At least maybe there's another way to do that thing and it might work. Is the funny part.
Or timing.
Yeah, timing. Yeah, it's all about
So
the
you can
time.
do it, but not at the time I did, or
Or you can do this, but not the way I did. Is
yeah.
like you can't have this happen and then this happen and then also do this. You might be able to get one of those things in, but not all three. Something like that. To
It's
be very
the
abstract for a
more
second.
you talk about writing, the more you realize how complex it is.
Yes. And complex more than complicated, right? I mean, because
Yeah.
complicated is like there's all these little finicky bits, but complex is like there's a ton that interacts with everything, and it's all dense in a way. That's how I
Yeah, I
tend to
always
view it.
feel like I have a lot of threads that I'm trying to hold on to when I'm writing, and then when I'm not writing, there's all these balls in the air between writing and planning and marketing and networking, and no
Yeah.
wonder I go to bed at like 9:30 every night.
Hey, no shame in that. Just in bed at like 9. But yeah, I mean, I think it's funny because I'm just imagining those balls you're juggling, and they're balls of yarn. 'Cause there's all these threads in them. Anyway. So you've got your books in the works. Got some books with your editor, or one book with your editor, and another that you're wrapping up, right?
Yeah, so the Reborn, the first book,
Yeah.
is out. It's been out for about a year and a half. Second book's at the publisher. Uh, and then the third one, I just finished like kind of the draft and the edits, I would say. I would 3 days, I think 3 or 4 days ago, wanted
Mm.
it done by the end of summer vacation because I'm a teacher, and I finished it with 48 hours to spare.
Congratulations,
And then
victory.
I sat on my couch and did nothing for 2 full days. And then I went in and started setting up my classroom. I was like, well, those 2 days were great.
That's the 2 days that make it all worthwhile.
Well, yeah, summer vacation. Well, it's a weird year for summer vacation because it's been 2 months, but it feels like it's been five. It's a little bit confusing.
Yeah.
So I am not. I have my brain is lost all sense of time.
Yeah, it's the whole world had basically my life happen to them, or at least all of America, the mainland United States and such. My life was like, oh, now there's nothing. Now you're not really allowed to go anywhere, but you also don't have to go anywhere for in a lot of cases, at least for me.
All right.
That's how it worked out. I was like, oh, there's nowhere to go, and also no reason to go anywhere. I was like, oh, great. Now I'm just gonna sit here all day and be bored and drive myself insane. Anyway,
I
so
can do it. The
yeah.
4-year-old does not handle it well.
Oof, yeah. Oh, I cannot imagine having a kid in this situation. Yeah.
You can only watch so much Paw Patrol and PJ Masks when you're actually looking forward to SpongeBob, like just for something different.
Yikes.
That says a lot.
Yeah. It's been a very unusual year. I wonder how people, just to go back to the history thing a little bit, I wonder how people can write about 2020. It's so scary.
Oh,
Uh,
I've got running documents on my computer, and it's like, dear, so that my daughter, I, I never mention her name on air. I just call her Stinker or Chickpea. So, dear Chickpea, when your social studies class discusses this, here's some documentation of the stress and uh, emotions of your mother.
a personal history of sorts, yes.
And she'll be like, oh, yay. She'll be
Yeah.
like, my mom is a dork. I'll be
Yeah,
like,
she'll be going
yes,
into
I am.
like sixth grade or something, and you'll pull out these notes to give to her for what 2020 was like.
Yeah. Well, I mean, she had her birthday in quarantine, so,
Yeah, yeah.
and
It's
just a lot of my like, oh, I was not watching the news enough that the shutdown really shocked me because I was like, what? Things are happening in the world? Because I mean, right before it was report card season and my dance show. So it's not like I was really, there was like a solid month there where I was not really paying attention to anything in the outside world. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, I should watch the news.
Oh
Like,
boy,
I
yeah.
should probably pay attention.
I had just flown. The first I heard of the COVID-19, I just flown back from. I just arrived home from Portland, Oregon, so I flew back to Minnesota because I'd been visiting my brother in Portland in January, and one of my other family members is like, hey, "So did you get? Was there anybody from China on the plane?" It was such a weird thing to say. I whatever. The less said about that one, the better. But he was like, because that currently at the time, I'm like, come on, there's not going to be a pandemic. I remember thinking that. Oh, how wrong was I? Anyway,
Yeah. Living through history is hard.
it
But
sure
lots
is.
of
That's a
people are doing way more writing. So my editor, who is stuck in Costa Rica, by the way, since February,
yeah. Stuck's the
she
one word, I guess.
she has like tripled her volume of like how many
Wow.
people want edits done because everyone is either got more time to write or they have more motivation to write, or I find that if your emotions change, whether good or bad or whatever, you have more inspiration to write. And so
Hmm.
she is just overloaded. So I think give it a bit of time and we'll have lots of good literature, whether directly whether it'll be directly about the coronavirus in 2020 or just a larger volume and more tied into emotions. There's going to be some good stuff coming if we just wait a few more months, and it'll be interesting to see what comes out.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. And it's funny because I've heard a lot of independent authors talking about how specifically Terry Mixon over at the Dead Robot Society podcast is a pretty fun show. I really enjoy that show, but uh, Terry was like, oh yeah, what happens when Netflix runs out of new shows that can air that have already been recorded? Like, what are they gonna do? It's one of those like when they can't when new shows just stop appearing on network TV and stuff. How bored are people gonna be? How much are people gonna turn to other forms of media, like books?
Exactly.
It's gonna be I mean, the potential is there for a major shakeup, which is interesting. At least to hear him tell it. I'm not sure how
I
that
was
works, but yeah.
I was 2 months away from the new seasons of my. I only watched two shows: *Handmaid's Tale* and *Discovery of Witches*.
Hmm.
And both of them were about to start filming.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then I was like, well, it's okay. I still got Sesame Street. It's fine.
Oof. That's not exactly the same.
It's not, but I do learn a lot about it. They're quite creative with their parodies.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
props to Sesame Street. They do keep me entertained, and I'll watch that more than I'll watch anything else.
So actually, we do tend to. Well, actually, no, we're out of time. So
Aw,
yeah, it's been fun. We rambled a bit there, but I think it's been a good show. And thanks for being on the show, Jenna.
authors ramble. It's just part of our charm.
It's natural. It's a natural thing, especially you when you put us. When you put it in a basically a cage match with they're like, oh yeah, we're just gonna talk to each other for half an hour, and we'll see what happens. It's fun. You never know what's gonna happen though, and I guess that's part of the joy of it. So,
Yeah.
Jenna, tell people where they can find your work and your podcast.
So we'll start with the podcast. So it's Quill and Ink podcast for book lovers. We are on YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, Blurberry, 30 billion more channels that I can't remember off the top of my head. But you can find us on Facebook or Instagram and Twitter and all those good places. And then for me, just search up Jenna Greene, but just remember to spell green with an E on the end. And I'm in all the wonderful places: Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. And my website is Jenna Greene with an E on the end, jennagreen.ca, because I'm up here in good old Canada.
The maple syrup land. Yes, famous for the bears and the fruit of the tree. Anyway,
Yep. It's pretty, and snow.
and the snow. Yeah, yeah. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. As for this podcast, you can find us at mentalcellarpublications.com. You can find my books at timneedawriter.com. That's N-E-E-D, Tim, T-I-M, NEEDWRITER.com. That's the site with the new books and the news and the links to Amazon and all that stuff. And you can get my books on Amazon.com. So, yeah, Shadow Prince should be out soon. Demon Scroll is looking good. It's got a fully a rearranged ebook interior since when it was released. And, of course, the new edit is shining. Let me put it that way. I did a good job with that one. At least I hope so. Anyway, thanks for listening, everybody, and have a good week.